Well, welcome everybody to another video. Got a really interesting topic for you all here, related to the news about these mini X-Packs. So ArenaNet have revealed them. They were very cagey in the blog post about whether Elite Specialisations would be a part of the new format with the game. The fact they were cagey about it seems to me, and I think quite rightly so to a lot of other people, that they're probably experimenting with getting rid of Elite Specialisations. They're too difficult to work with. They want to go somewhere else. And this, to me, is a really risky move. It's a dodgy idea. If I look at the history of this game's development, and I look back at the Icebrood Saga, which was the announcement of the Icebrood Saga, which was a very similar moment to this, what did they do there? They said, well, look, we're going to do Living World forever. You won't have to pay anything, but we'll go expansion scale with Living World. And so everyone said, cool, what's expansion scale about the Icebrood Saga? And they didn't have an answer. Elite specs were central to that conversation. People really, really like them. Now, I, as a super nerdy fan of this game that's played it for years, you know, I'm in anyway. Let's be honest. I'm biased. I'll be trying it out. I'm pretty much in the pro camp anyway, even if they cut that away. But I have been curious, genuinely, like, what are the proportions of the players that will be upset with this? And possibly will just leave this MMO if there's not elite specs. So I threw up a poll. I'm still getting used to doing this kind of thing on YouTube. Thanks to everyone who voted already. I mean, I only did it before I went to bed. And we've got over 3,000 votes as of me speaking to the mic here. I said, I've got to know, if they've cut Elite Specialisations entirely, how do you feel? 25% of you, a quarter of you, say it's fine, you don't need them at all, you're not upset at all. Let's just keep going. I think that that's a fully reasonable opinion to have, by the way. If you look at the quality of the End of Dragon specs, if you look at the amount of themes and bases that are already covered, mechanical niches that are already covered, I get being in this camp, this 25%. The majority of you guys, on 37%, which still isn't too high of a proportion, to be honest, they're saying it sucks, but the expansion will still be good enough to get, so they're disgruntled. I'm assuming that they're really hoping the other areas of the expansion will be as good as possible, but they'll suck it up and they'll take it, even though they recognize it's not a good move. And then we get into the negative ones. Now, these are actually huge numbers of you guys, in my opinion, and I might have been a little bit biased. One of you guys had a comment with the way I've worded these. But I put, it sucks, I need a substitute system for skills, traits, etc., or I'm out. So that's people threatening to not get the expansion, people who really don't like this. They will not be here unless there's some other way to get new skills to, you know, expand on their RPG character. And I think I totally get where these people are coming from. This is Guild Wars. You know, this game, this franchise has its roots in a deck-building CO RPG with Guild Wars 1. And look at how far we will have come if they get rid of elite specs here now, and there's really not even anything else satisfying to fill that void. The Icebrood Saga seemed to believe that a satisfactory replacement for the Void was the Mastery system. And you look at the way they did a bunch of the Masteries in the Icebrood Saga, they interacted with combat more than previous Masteries did, when you look at mounts and bouncing mushrooms and stuff. I think that that's where they were trying to pave it, but nobody appreciated that on any level as anywhere near as good as Elite Specs. I happen to think that all those Masteries are some of the worst ones they ever did. So this is a lot of people. 30% of people saying they need a substitute system. And then finally, I put the hyper-negative one. I need Elite Specialisations full stop. If they're gone, so am I. 8% of you guys voted on that. And I don't really... I think this is a bit hyperbolic. I don't really identify with anyone saying this. There are problems with Elite Specs. I get that they're really strong and really exciting, but I think it's a position of limited imagination to think, oh, there's absolutely nothing else they could ever do. It has to be Elite Specs or I'm gone. You know, that seems a bit silly. I almost put that as a joke option, but it ended up getting quite a high vote. So, hey, what do I know? Nearly 10% people saying that. So, it's a risky, important conversation. I think it will be the central issue, just as it was with the Icebrood Saga, to the success of these mini X-Packs. And I kind of sort of sat down and started thinking to myself, well, what else can they do if it's not Elite Specs? How else can they forge ahead? The first thing we have to really... I mean, if this is what they're actually doing, obviously, we don't know for sure, but it's a very light blog post, so there's some assumptions going on here. If we assume they're getting rid of Elite Specs, we also have to assume the reasons why. Now, for me, I think, first of all, yeah, it's that idea of running out of roads. If they're doing yearly X-Packs, 9 a year would just be completely insane. They would run out of themes, they'd run out of gameplay niches incredibly quick. But beyond that, just the implementation, and I think that is... If I'm going to guess why they might move away from them, it would just be the amount of resources and time it takes to implement everything, to design everything, to create art for everything. and then just keep going on that rat race forever and ever and ever to also juggle that with continual balance throughout the year. I mean, it's just going to be a huge amount of resources. So that would be my assumption as to why. And so, yeah, let's go through. That's what this video is going to be. A couple of different proposals, as far as I see it, ways ArenaNet could go through this, and things we might see from the mini X-Packs. And as I take you guys through these, there's not very many proposals, I would really like to hear which is your favorite, and I want you guys to think as I talk about them, which ones you really hate, which ones you really like, and, we'll get a bit of a discussion about it. So, let's run through. First of all, proposal 1 is very obvious. It's something that we've talked about in a lot of recent videos. I'm not going to linger on it here. They could just cut back on the number of elite specs. I mean, this is kind of sidestepping the issue. They could keep the exact same thing, but instead of doing 9 at once, which is a crazy amount of effort, instead, the other extreme would be they just do 1 elite spec per year. Just 1. I actually don't like that idea because it's now only a single class that you're affecting, and as far as I'm concerned, Guild Wars 2 is a game where you should multi-class. It's got so much account binding in it, it's so easy to level in it, and there's so much joy to be had in playing other professions, in having other races, in getting other skins and all that stuff. You're really missing out if you're only playing a single class. I can only assume that a small proportion of the user base nowadays is only on a single class. But for those there, if their elite spec is the last one that gets done, they're being asked to wait 10 years for an expansion to their class. And now we're only talking about a proportion of 1/9 of the user base. So, I don't know whether it's really that big of a deal, but obviously people aren't going to be super happy about that. In fact, anytime I've mentioned this idea in the past couple of days, or hell, even in previous years, conversations like this have come up, I always get these really hyper-aggressive comments of people who assume they'll be at the back of the list and kind of indulge in that completely, in their opinion, disastrous scenario. So can ArenaNet do one at a time? I don't think so. I think 2 at a time, though, where each hits a very different theme, is quite viable and does work quite well. When I look at other MMOs, they release 2 classes at a time, and there's like this idea that people can swap. I think that that's a nice encouragement for Guild Wars 2 as well. If something comes out, you don't access it, so this encourages you to make a new character. That could be actually quite good. And then there's the idea of 3, which now we're talking about a lot of resources again at 3 for every year. It's getting a bit crazy, but with 3 you can hit each armor class, and maybe that somehow feels a little more appropriate. That also means, if you're doing mini X-Packs 1 a year and they do 3 at a time, that means in 3 years they've got the whole rung out, and that's about the same progress that we're going at now. It usually takes them 3 years or more, if you average it out, for us to get a new wave of elite specs. So we'd actually be on the same pace if they did 3 at a time. It's an interesting idea. I don't want to talk about it too much more, but it is proposal 1. There you have it. Let's get into some juicier things. Let's genuinely indulge in the idea. No elite specs. As amazing as they are, let's imagine no elite specs. Well, here we go. So proposal 2. This, I don't really advocate myself, but there is a potential here. And I guess on this poll, I put on... I have that option 1 on the poll. It doesn't suck, I have no opinions. Lots of people said that. They could just do balance patches. Now, listen, I know that balance patches don't have any, cool flavor to them. They don't tend to have lots of amazing art. They're not marketable. But in truth, if you're, just really into playing the game, you understand the build craft, balance patches can do anything that they want. A balance patch can create an alacrity spec for a class that currently doesn't have it. They could just put it wherever they feel is best. Balance patch, I have a friend who plays Mesmer and he really wants a Mesmer healer. A balance patch could create a Mesmer healer by retooling the inspiration line. And, in fact, with the current patch, some people are trying to get some Mesmer healing shenanigans back in. But balance patches can put quickness anywhere they like. They can emphasize vulnerability or stability or protection or whatever. They can actually do anything. And I think being a dedicated player of Guild Wars 2, that's blatantly obvious. For a lot of us, balance patches are the thing to keep an eye on. They are the most exciting thing about the game because they could do anything. Sometimes they even put art and stuff on there. I think about when they added certain traits through balance patches where the trait would modify a skill completely, and now it's a new skill, it has a new icon, it has new interactions and mechanics. They've done that a few times in the past. Think about the thief trap skills, the thief preparations. They completely gutted a utility skill line there and added all these amazing fancy traps that looked like they were straight out of a Cantha expansion years before we got to go to Cantha. It just kind of came out of nowhere. So, yes, I do kind of believe balance patches are something to think about. Not very exciting. And, you know, they would not be a bullet point, unfortunately, on, you know, the sale of some expansion. So I'm not too all about this idea, but let's get it out of the way with. That is a thing. Let's not forget that. Next, Proposal 3. They could go back to something they were doing like around Living World Season 1, some of the earliest days of Guild Wars 2, where they continue to add new... Let's face it, what we want is new skills, we want new traits, we want new options, right? That's what it comes down to. What they could do is just dump stuff in randomly when it feels appropriate. That is something they did once upon a time. Like when the Tower of Nightmares originally came out, everyone could they go on a little quest, get a new heal skill, the antitoxin spray. The idea for like questing for that skill and stuff was pretty cool. And the idea that that skill worked for a specific scenario was also pretty cool. I think there's an argument against the antitoxin spray because it's profession agnostic. You know, everyone gets it, so it's not like really unique or special to you. And I can kind of see that. And generally speaking, I don't think that these patches went that well. They were very irregular. The other big time it happened was there was a random update where everyone got a new heal skill. Like there were only 3 heal skills originally, and then like a 4th one got added to all the classes. Which again was not exactly very exciting. I mean, you might say, well, that's just because they did a heal skill WP. What if they did an elite? And maybe you're right about that. I mean, how exciting can you keep being with new heal skills? In fact, talking about running out of road and the elite specializations from End of Dragons feeling a bit dodgy, I think that's actually a really good point. Like, how many new heal skills do you want ArenaNet to design for elite specs? It's a heal skill. It's something you press to heal yourself. I'm amazed they've been as creative as they have for all of the current ones. But you can already see there's a bunch of utility skills and stuff getting put in the game that just don't feel that great, you know? It's a slightly reflavored Condi Cleanse. It's a slightly reflavored Stun Break, you know? And every single one of the 9 on the new wave have had that. And it just kind of feels like it's there because it has to be there, even though it's a ton of work for them to do. So something to think about the whole running out of road thing. But going back to the idea that they can just dump stuff in, it's a possibility. I think this could work if there are genuinely cool, like, collections and quests and adventures and things for us to do. This kind of overlaps with the mastery system a bit, but as much as I dislike the power creep of it, I think the Signet of Agony from Lake Doric's actually kind of cool, you know? You earn that new signet for your downstate specifically from doing a certain quest. I think that's interesting. Maybe something they can do. The other big thing that's possible with this just random higgledy-piggledy dropping in is weapons. Okay, now weapons are a big topic. I think when people like elite specs, a good proportion of where their excitement is comes from the idea of getting new weapons. Weapons are the buttons we press most regularly, they're on the lowest cooldowns, they define your playstyle very, very heavily. And I think all of us have keen ideas about weapons we want. You know, I read a comment just this morning of a guy saying, this sucks, why don't I have a rifle on my Ranger yet? I really want a rifle on my Ranger, I've wanted it since 2012, and now I may never get it, this is really lame. You know, I think when people are excited about elite specs, quite often it's just the weapon thing. So what about we go into these mini X-Packs and they've just added a new weapon? Or what they can also do, first of all, which is even more saving on resources, is just swap weapon slots around. You know, like dual-wielding scepters. That's something I, as an Ellie main back in the day, used to think about, because there's a character in Ascalon Catacombs that does it. Do I need a whole elite specialization? Or would I just like to see them allow me to put a scepter in the offhand? It's only 2 skills, you know, so if you're a Necro, there would only be two things for them to design. So maybe that's more accessible. And there's ideas there. There's main hand, shield, focus. There's lots of things you could swap around. And then they can start looking at entirely new weapons too. Scythes. I mean, I'm excited about the idea of getting a scythe, a proper new weapon. Great axes, whips. Those are all the really fun ones. I would like to believe in a Guild Wars that can implement that kind of stuff one day. Underwater weapons coming above ground. I still want a spear. I want a proper Paragon experience on my warrior where I throw a spear or I get to wield a trident above land. Are we saying that all this stuff has to go away just because elite specs are? Can't they dump these in? I think it's actually more realistic than it might first look. I'm curious to see what you guys think. There is an old quote. I can't even remember who said it anymore. Like years and years ago, like 2014 old, where ArenaNet basically said that, like with the original Heart of Thorns wave, they said, look, adding totally new weapons is a bit tricky and, like, a lot of work because of, like, they have to figure out the loot tables and stuff, you know, if they can add scythes. But I don't know, is that really such a barrier? There's this other discussion of, like, the crossover skins and whether they've ruined it now. For example, I can wield a staff on my Revenant, so I get a melee staff, and I can put a skin on that staff that makes it look like a scythe. And I'm kind of using a scythe now. And has that not tampered with the fantasy? I kind of think no. I think I have a proper scythe anyway, and the crossover skins, whatever, who cares? And that's only really relevant for the scythes anyway. When we do look at great axes and when we do look at whips and stuff, there really aren't any great substitutes. There is another discussion, which is the weapon itself is actually quite arbitrary in Guild Wars 2. This is purely just a flavor thing. Like, when I'm an Ellie and I wield a dagger, I'm whipping people with it. I get a lightning whip. It's a dagger, but it's a whip animation. When I'm wielding a hammer on a Rev, it's a ranged weapon. You know, it really doesn't actually mean anything. They can put any skill on any weapon. But despite this, I think that it's still exciting, and I would like to see these. So would we accept, this is Proposal 3, would we accept a mini X-Pack where they just kind of, like, randomly pick some stuff to put in? Everyone gets a new elite skill this X-Pack. There's no, like, overarching format to it. It's just everyone gets a new elite skill. Or this next X-Pack, we're adding to the scythe to the game, and certain classes get it, but then certain classes don't, maybe. Some professions are a little bit trickier too, in as much as, like, it's really annoying to make new weapons for Ellies, because they have all the achievements. And it's kind of weird to make new weapons for NGs, who have, like, the whole kit philosophy and, you know, their tools on their F skills. And it's like, does this work forever? I can see why they're leery. I think a lot of the problems they have with designing elite specs also occur with this just throwing new weapons in as well. But maybe it's less effort because it's just one weapon or something. So it's something to think about. Moving on, I have 2 more proposals before the end of this video. Both of these proposals are things I have done videos about in the past. I never did them in the context of, like, mini X-Packs. This wasn't a thing that we knew about. One of these proposals I actually made a long time ago, and the community back then didn't really like this at all. It was a video I made where what I was trying to do was tackle the issue of weak racial skills. I loved in Guild Wars 1 the idea of becoming a bear as a Norn, and now when I play Guild Wars 2, I never become the bear because that skill is deliberately designed to be very weak because they don't want you to have to play a Norn to be competitive in raids or whatever. So basically there are all these interesting ideas. You know, the Charzuka, what a badass, interesting idea for a skill. You know, summoning, like, your druid companion, like the Oak Heart and stuff as a Sylvari. Having golems that you can pilot and ride around like mechs as Asura. These are all amazing skills. And they've never had a real place in Guild Wars because they've always been designed to be deliberately weak because of this issue. So I was trying to tackle that, and I sort of created this proposal. This proposal actually works very well as a substitute for elite specs as well. So I want to talk about it now, many years later. That's one of the final 2. And then the other one, I guess I'll start with this one. Funnily enough, I was just talking to a friend in Discord about this, and we kind of came up with a funny name for it. So let's first do Proposal 4. I'm going to call this Ascensions. Now, this is a proposal to get an elite spec style system into the game, but it's way less work for them to implement. We still get the amazing themes. You still get the, like, the new icon, the new class name, you get, like, a skin, you get, you know, something iconic that feels like you've transformed the class. This would look good on a bullet point on, you know, a sales page for the expansion or something. But unlike elite specs, this idea of an ascension would be a lot thinner. So it's not a nightmare to make 9 at once. And unlike elite specializations, which will run out of road, adding all these new heal skills and stuff, these don't have to do that. So if you look in game here, I've got my 3 specialization lines. Now this bottom slot, this is the only one that we're allowed to put an elite spec into, isn't it? It's got that slight border around the outside so that we know that this is a special slot. If I want to have my Ellie here and turn it into a Weaver, I need to slot Weaver down there, and Weaver won't go into the upper slots. The idea of an Ascension is, okay, well, what happens if we take, say, the Fire Magic line, and we put the Fire Magic line in this bottom slot? Well, currently, nothing happens. Fire Magic works just as it normally operates, and you know, the thing here is we just get to run 3 core lines if we like. And on some classes that has some impact, you know, on engineer, that means you're going to get like mini mower and you're going to get a little mortar strike and stuff. But generally this doesn't change the game much. My proposal here is, let's say a hypothetical mini X-Pac's coming up. That mini X-Pac is going to give the Pyromancer to Ellie's. Okay, there's going to be 9 new of these like subclass feeling things, just like elite specs. You're not going to be called an elementalist anymore. You're going to be called a pyromancer. You're going to have your pyromancer icon. There's going to be like pyromancer skin or something. But what it is instead of them designing a whole new thing, this is simply a supercharged fire magic line. Once we have found hero points in the new expansion, those still deserve to have a place in the game. We'll train pyromancer, and when we slot fire down here now, we've become a pyromancer. That's it. That's the fundamental idea. Now, ArenaNet themselves can decide how heavy they want the mechanics to be here. What they could do, for example, is just make all of the traits more potent, if they wanted. So it's fire plus, it's like really, really strong. You know, you look at the Grandmasters in a new way because now they're like buffed out the ass. And the trade-off is you don't get to run an elite spec, but you do get like hyper-tuned fire magic stuff. So it still feels like fire magic. They're not creating any new animations or coding anything, but the traits are now way stronger. That's a very, very, very lame way they could do it, a very thin way they could do it. Or they could go further. They could say, all right, well, look, if you ascend as fire, we're going to give you a 4th trait choice in every line. Or maybe they'll say, okay, maybe there's actually going to be a whole new tier of traits after Grandmaster that you only get if you've ascended as a pyromancer. So these are like super traits, and that's what they're going to do. The mechanics, the crunch, the additional build craft is you get these new like new traits that come at the end. Or they can go further with it. If they feel like they have the resources to tie a weapon to this thing, and they're going to keep doing the new weapons thing, they can put a weapon on there. If they feel they have the resources to do an elite skill, they can put an elite skill on there. And then finally, if they have the resources to even do all the utility skills, well, that would just be an elite spec now, right? That's just an elite spec. So I'm assuming they would cut something, and it would be their choice what they cut. Now, for me personally, I would take a very, very thin idea here. I like the idea of some new traits, maybe some slightly buffed traits, but some new traits and an elite skill. For me, if they hit just those 2 bars, I'm pretty happy with that. I really like elite skills. I think they're very cool, and it would be a shame to see a Guild Wars where we never get new elite skills. After that, I would really like a new weapon. I think a new weapon also represents a lot of bang for our buck and is very, very exciting, especially if this is then combined with what we talked about earlier with like scythes and stuff. If they did that, I think this is huge. And what this means is every class has 5 specs already for their core specs. That's years and years and years that they can continue creating like these ascensions. By the time they've run out of ascensions way down the line, maybe, you know, people's desire for even more crunch and stuff is getting even lessened. So it's not a perfect proposal, but I think it's a pretty good one. Now, if you watched my video on it, you know, last year or something, I had a whole spreadsheet where I actually invented like what each line could graduate into. I won't go through all of that here just for the sake of time, but some of my favorites, like here I've gone with the fire magic into pyromancer idea. It's very easy to come up with cool ones for all the classes. So Mesmer, you know, if you look at the art here for the inspiration line, for when you're training inspiration, I mean, what is that, right? That's a bard. So inspiration, if you ascend inspiration, you become a bard, and there you go, that's your Mesmer healer. And by the way, let's remember as well that each line tends to have a corresponding utility line with it as well, so you can do fun things with that if you're ascending one of these lines. You know, you could, for ranger, marksmanship might turn you into a hunter, necromancer, death magic into a lich, trickery, you know, you've got these dice and stuff on the art, could become like the gambler class, alchemist for engineers who ascend alchemy. You know, if you're a warrior, you ascend tactics. Well, that's a paragon. That's very clearly a paragon, and they could put a spear with it. So that's my idea there. It's essentially do elite specs again, but give it a new name, slightly different interaction, and now they have the choice to cut out all the chaff. They don't have to do all these shitty stun breaks and heals and all that kind of stuff. They can really hyper-focus on what they want. Now, to me, I think that's okay. But it does still have a few issues, like the fact that you're doing 9 at once, potentially. There are going to be people out there who, no matter what, will be furious that every tiny little component of an elite spec isn't still there. You know, the kind of point of this video is to accept we're having to make some concessions here. And there will be people out there who just don't understand that, so won't like it full stop. But it's a thought. I also had an idea in that previous video of you could do a really weird thing sometimes where, you know, Guardian has the virtues line. You could be more creative. Virtues, you could like reverse it. So instead of honor, they're cowardice, and instead of justice, it's vengeance. And you know, in that term, if you flipped the theme, well, there you've sort of made a Dark Knight, haven't you? So there are fun things you can do. There is this question of a core mechanic as well, by the way. Should a Pyromancer get a new core mechanic? I kind of like that idea if they were doing that. I think I'd take either a weapon or a core mechanic. One or the other, you know? And give me a new weapon or give me a mechanic. Let me, like, double tap fire to supercharge it or something, I don't know. If they pick one or the other, I think that's pretty good. Alright, so there you go, that's Proposal 4. Let's finish the video off now with Proposal 5. This is the one that I haven't talked about for years and years and years. This is the one tied to the racial skill thing I was mentioning a second ago. This is probably the most exciting one as far as this video is concerned. If you guys have been treating this video like a podcast, it's time to tab back in and take a little bit of a look at the footage, because I have some amazing art and representations of this feature, this idea. I sort of casually mentioned it in a stream at some point about a year and a half ago. And one of you guys, one of the Spuds, got really inspired about it. I'm sure they're happy with me saying their username. It's Bahamut731LP. You can find them in the Spud Discord. Amazingly talented. They ended up building a website that emulates the Guild Wars 2 in-game UI, but they can mess around with it in any way that they like. And they designed the system I was talking about. They did it kind of as a bit of a fan fiction thing, but you can actually see it in action. Okay, so and they've given me footage. I've been talking to them a bunch about it. We both kind of put the idea down over this past year over End of Dragons, but it felt like finally this was a really good time to talk about it once again. So, Proposal 5, Cultural Specialisations. So, what is this proposal? Well, the fundamental idea is currently in game you get 3 specs you can slot at once. I'm proposing that we add a 4th line that everyone can now add in addition to their 3 profession lines. So you get the 3 things make up your profession. You also get a 4th line. It's a minor line. It is not as potent in terms of balance as the profession lines itself. But this line, like an elite spec, comes bundled with skills, potentially a weapon if you really want, but traits as well, importantly. Skills and traits are the 2 big things. Like what I just mentioned with Ascensions, you know, this new trait line does not have to be as deep and fleshed out as a full elite specialization. But the point here is this is profession agnostic, so everyone can slot it. Now, when you look at ArenaNet, how they currently design things, they have to do 9 elite specs, and some players only experience value from one of them. They do all this work on all 9, and then you log in on expansion launch day, and you only see a 9th of their effort. You only appreciate a 9th of what they've done. Now, with this proposal, they could make just 3 cultural specs. They've only put in a 1/3 of the effort, but you playing it, especially as like a monoclasser, you get triple the value because you've played through this expansion, and instead of just getting 1 new elite spec, you've got 3 cultural ones that you can pick from at once. So that's the fundamental idea. The rest, I'll show it to you because it will make more sense to see it. Like with Ascensions, this is good for hero points and stuff as well. So here's a little video from a few years ago now, actually. This is work in progress, early concept. You can see you've got the 3 warrior lines. This is a spellbreaker, but we've scrolled down slightly, and you see you've got the 4th line there. So this would be a human. This person has opted to be human specialized. They've picked the human cultural spec. You can see that this is an example of how a line might look. There might be less traits overall. You might still get a choice of 3 if you like. I mean, for me personally, if I was designing this, I'd have the choice of 3 bit at the Grandmaster level, just for, you know, they're the most impactful. But you can configure these things in any way you like. Now, the idea is, while this person has human on, they have access to new skills. They're not represented on the UI here, but this is how you would get access to the Hounds of Balthazar, which now anyone can use, and they can buff to be real abilities with uses. And on top of that, they get these human traits. Now, these can maybe affect them in Crichton regions, a bit like the mastery system might work. They might offer perks a bit like potions, you know, where it's like, oh, more damage against centaurs and stuff. They could do it that way, or, and this would be my preference actually, these do not have to just be PvE affecting traits. I would prefer it if everyone got to play with these, i.e. you can take them into World vs. World, because if you look at that kind of format, World vs. Worlders need new toys from expansions, because what else do they get? So I would rather they be universal combat buffs. But that's a player who's chosen to be human. Now, you might also, as you can see here, choose to be Asura, or you might choose to be Sylvari or so on. So when I very first started talking about this proposal years ago, I was hyper fixated on the playable races and making cultural specs for the playable races, because then you simply pair all the racial skills with the spec, and now the racial skills can be good, you know? You could be a Norn player. It might be that piloting a golem is the meta for flakking at some fight. Some new strike missions come out this flak. Riding around in an Asura mech is the way to do it. But you're not an Asura, so the devs can never balance it that way. However, with this kind of proposal, you could be a Norn, you just slot the Asura spec, and boom, now all these skills exist, and bear form is allowed to be meta, and anything else you think is allowed to be meta. Now, back in the day, that was my central concern, getting these skills to be valuable and viable. But it was a bit of a depressing video to make as well, because some of the feedback I got on it was some people would not accept the idea that a Norn should be allowed to use the Asura skills on any level, that it would stop them being special. They were completely blind to the fact that these skills effectively don't exist in Guild Wars 2 right now, and haven't for a decade. We haven't been able to play with these toys for 10 years, but it's special and unique to the race. So, I don't know, I don't buy that as a valid argument at all. I would really like those skills to exist, but that's kind of what the discussion became about. Today, that's not really what I want the discussion to be about. Let's say with this proposal, it has nothing to do with Asura, Sylvari, Norn. Let's leave Bearform dead. Let's leave the Charzuka dead. Let's not fix these things just because there might be those naysayers out there. Instead, let's just look at cultural specializations as something that can come in with mini X-Packs, or even Living World, well, it's not called Living World, or even the patches following the mini X-Packs, you know, the quarterly releases, which, you know, are technically a part of the mini X-Pack. Let's think about those as just things that can come in over time. And in fact, let's imagine that they had been coming in throughout, like, Season 4 and Season 3 and so on. Well, what might that have looked like? Well, you might have had a release like Istan, where map completion in Istan involves getting hero points, and you spend those hero points training up a new Sunspear line. And there are cool Sunspear-based perks, and a couple, and they don't even have to be consistent about how many new skills they give you or whatever. There are some new Sunspear skills that you get from slotting that specialization. And so while we're in that area of the world, maybe we slot the Sunspear stuff. Maybe when we go elsewhere, we slot different things. Every patch would have this skill expansion, this, you know, trait expansion, these kinds of new balance toys for us to have. So look at this mock-up here. Look as we scroll through this list. So it wasn't just that they built the UI for this, but they designed all these different ideas. So they've got a Dwarf line, Tengu, Corsair, and of course, if Tengu ever became a full playable race, then that would fit as well perfectly. Corsairs, Zephyrite, and I can imagine exactly which patch each would be. We get the Awakened spec, the Sunspears. So here, and again, like you train it with hero challenges, hero points. They continue to have use. And as you'll see, we get a skill sometimes, we get a trait. Now, all these tooltips, all this art, all this fan art and everything, the exact, you know, if you pause this video and you read each tooltip, you might disagree with the actual balance ideas here. I didn't necessarily come up with any of the traits. This was sort of a part of their fanfic. It's just the principle that I want to get across to you guys, and, you know, just the fundamental idea here. And then there's the Awaken line. You can also see it's so cool. This is a later form of the UI. Down on those lower ones, you know, there's different mastery points required to unlock them, or you know, they're associated with different Living World patches that the theoretical player right now didn't actually have. Obviously, now with this idea of mini X-Packs, that's not necessarily what the reality would be in the end. But yeah, you train it up, and then you just slot it out into that 4th slot. And now this, unlike Ascensions, and unlike some of the other proposals that we've had, this is an interesting idea in that it's potentially infinite. I mean, there is any faction, any storyline, any kind of lore from the existing game, or that they'll write for new expansions, like let's say we're going to Zoteka or whatever, that they can just continue putting these in. This never has to run out. This has absolutely no expectation for how much effort and resource drain it has to be. And, like I mentioned, they don't have to do 9 at once. Every player, because it's profession agnostic, gets access to all of them. So you do actually get a lot of new toys. The lines themselves might not be the most potent things in the world. And that would be correct, by the way, because you want the profession to still be the thing that matters most. But, you know, if you're going to unlock a couple of these, each X-Pack, this is like where the mastery system fails, but the elite specialization system succeeds in giving us new things to play with. The only downside here is that, unlike with full-on elite specs, this doesn't really work for giving you a new icon or giving you feeling like a new subclass. You know, it's not going to be that major, and it's never going to interact that closely with your core profession. So there are downsides there. That's something that the Ascension proposal would be better at. So yeah, anyway, as far as I can see, these are the big kinds of things that ArenaNet can do. On the one hand, I think if you look at this idea there might not be elite specs, that sounds like a massive bummer. But I do think there are other ways that they can forge ahead. I'm really interested to see what you guys think, whether you have your own proposals especially. I'd love to hear just people's inspiration and idea with this, because this is just us armchair speculating at the end of the day. And I'd love to see what you guys think. Now, as for this amazing stuff Bahamut made, I think I'm going to do a stream later today where I just like casually go through their proposal with the cultural specs and actually look at the balance and the more fanficky side of it, just for the fun of it, you know, just imagine what some of those things would be like, because there's a lot I haven't seen that they've designed. So that'd be quite fun. You guys can come along with that if you like. And yeah, that's it really. Let's just talk a bit about what a world without elite specializations might look like. Hopefully this got you guys thinking in some ways. If you think they're all terrible, let me know that as well, if you like. And I will see you on the next one very, very soon. Take care now, guys, and have a good evening.